I guess it's time for the panel, Ingredients of Great Applications. So, yay. Some of the panelists here, I guess you already know because they have already had their sessions earlier. Yasuhiro, Esteban from SoundCloud, Steven from Airbnb, and finally we have Priscilla, the new face. So Priscilla is the head of UX at SP Digital. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more? It's on. It's on.
Hello? Hello? Hi everyone, my name is Priscilla. I'm head of UX and design in the SP Group. So SP Group is a leading energy company in Asia Pac, and we're probably one of the biggest corporations in Singapore. And we are in the business of creating energy products. And previously I was in Property Guru. It's the leading property-seeking portal in Asia Pacific. So we learned a lot of inspiration from Airbnb, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later.
All right, I guess we shall start. So today's topic is about ingredients of building a great application. So I guess when we talk about this topic, it really comes from two components, right? One which would be the user experience, which I guess is Priscilla's core work. And the other, of course, is like development work, like what Esteban shared during his session earlier about like loading times and stuff like that. So all of these contribute to the user experience, and I guess that ultimately contributes to whether the application is great or not. So I guess to start off with, one question I would have for each of you is, what's one word or phrase that comes to mind when you think about a great app?
Okay, hello. I'm Yasuhiro, and it's ingredients of the app, right? Okay. There are many. I can think of the, especially for the iPhone, is 60 FPS animation, to make a wonderful experience for the user. Like, I don't know, any kind of animation is fine to me. Just like a tutorial, that surprises you. It doesn't have to be something functional. And that's, I think, the very first experience that we have, when you touch the app. And yeah, I can think of like many patterns, but especially the animation is very important to me.
So for you, it's animation. So for you, it's about the animation and the transitions, right? Okay.
Well, I guess there's like a lot of components to it, right? But if I had to try to think of just one, to me, I guess it's kind of like simplicity in a way. I would like to have be able to grab an app and out of the blue understand what it does, if it's by animations or whatever. But it's not like I need to get like a whole lot of mental load to try to figure out what I supposed to do with the app. So yeah, I would say simplicity in that sense.
Okay.
So for me, the phrase that comes into mind is setting the new standard. So it would be the new standards for the app for different industry. And it will be very evident when you are in product design and it says, hey, have you seen what this app is doing? Or have you seen what this app is doing in our industry? And it becomes the new definition of what a great app is.
I think that although I really love an app that's beautiful, if I had to pick one word, I might go against the grain and say boring. I really like when I open an app and the buttons are where I expect them to be and the flow is what I would imagine initially. And so that might be an app that I would come back to more and more.
Okay, so kind of like what he said, simplicity, right? So keep it boring, keep it simple, nothing new to learn. Everything is where you expect it to be. Cool. Okay, so both of you mentioned first impressions. So when you first touched the app, what kind of components when you first touched the app would matter a lot to you?
The components, right? I think the scroll view is perhaps the most important part in iOS app. How the scroll fits to your finger compared to other platform, and how it bounces, when the scroll reaches to the bottom or top, you can do the pro to refresh stuff, That's like, and with a 60 FPS, that's also part of animation for me. And yeah, and you can read the information about it, and that's my favorite part. Yeah.
Is the frame rate something you pay a lot of attention to? Like, do you always check to make sure all your content is scrolling smoothly?
Yeah, that's exactly. 60 FPS is important to me. Yeah.
Okay, when they do the 120 hertz on the iPad, are you going to check against that too?
I guess to me, there are like many components that I like when I first open an app that I will look at. Well, of course, the launch time, because obviously I'm kind of like passionate about it. But also, you know, something that I also don't like is kind of like unexpected surprises. For example, you just are opening an app, and the first thing that you get is like, hey, can I actually ask, get permission to send you notifications? Wow, that escalated quickly, right? So it's like, for what? So to me, it's like, the components will be like a speed of launching, and just give me the information that I need when I need it, not like as soon as like right in my face, or just opening the app and showing me like, hey, yeah, this is how you should use this app. You're supposed to kind of like turn it clockwise and then rotate and look at the sun and raise one feet and then push this button. It's like, oh, wow, that's too much to process in like 1 second when you open the app. So it's probably, I'm not gonna come back.
Cool.
For me, user experience, I think we have hierarchy of needs. It's very similar to the Maslow hierarchy of needs. For user experience, it's the same, and at the bottom, it's all about user value. So even if you look at your applications in your phone right now, all the applications that you decided to keep serve a value to you, and I think it's understanding what value your app serves for your user, and have this apparent right in the beginning, that will make a good impression and a good app.
I really love apps that have progressive disclosure that will get you to add information when you need it, add your profile later when you're going to post something, whatever it is. But I can also acknowledge with the data science teams who say, if you have a paywall, it'll throw away a lot of people, but the people that do sign up often will stick around longer. And so that just kills me inside, but I see the balance in a company that's trying to grow and get product market fit, that having real users is important to keep being able to iterate on the app. And so that is something that we still have to do in order to make an influence in a lot of people's lives. So that is a really tough trade-off.
Okay. Maybe one question for each of you about the experience before they have even downloaded the app. Like, for example, app download size. Is that something that you guys also take care of?
Well, if you build in Swift, you get, I think, 5 megabyte bonus. Wait, 5 or 50? But I know when I build, our app is like 100 megabytes now. And like Facebook, like a big company, so app used to have like more than that, but now, you know, everybody's app is increasing, and we still haven't not the Swift ABI stable yet, and that's I can't give up for that, you know.
I guess it also kind of like depends on what your end users are, because I mean, for example, if you target a certain demographic where, like, I don't know, like they have like very fast networks, even like mobile fast networks, then you can probably get around with having like bigger app sizes. But if you're targeting a demographic where the I don't know, like the cellular network are like very limited, then that's definitely something that I like to take into consideration, because you need to think about your users, like how much bandwidth you're taking from them. And now more that Apple has made it like easier to kind of like download bundled resources later on. So just kind of like try to defer those, the download of those resources until when you need it. And so yeah, definitely keep that in mind, I guess.
Definitely one of the consideration. And previously when we were targeting different markets, if you compare to Singapore to Indonesia, and when you are in Indonesia and you try to download something and you feel the pain that the users have when they try to download something that is really huge, I think then you would definitely try to consider the download size.
We've done a couple projects in particular, things like going through all of your translated strings and taking the string-based key out and replacing it with an integer at compile time to reduce the app size, or things like going through and taking away Swift structs and replacing them with classes because of how Swift structs will bloat your binary size. And there's even a particular large company that had a lot of data science work, and they found that every 5 bytes would reduce a single user. And so they were able to see that for them, and not saying it is for everyone, but for them that is the impact that it would have on their user base. And so that will change depending on the type of intent that a user has. If you need to use this banking app, they might not do it, but if it's something you just use different times through your day, it might have more of an impact for you.
That is very interesting data analytics. So you guys actually track the additional increase in data size and the drop rate of the user base?
This wasn't us in particular, but it was another company that said this is important enough to us to know how much engineering resources, how many people we should put on it. And so for them, they give the vice president of engineering, you have 3 megabytes that you can grow this quarter. You can divide it between all of the teams, and every week each individual director is responsible for saying how they're going to get back under their budget in the next 4 weeks if they've ever gone over.
Okay, on that question, right, we have something from the Pigeonhole, which I guess suits very much your comment on engineering resources. So one of them asks, how many engineers does your company actually hire to make that great app?
iOS, right? We have actually in the presentation I showed, we have 14 people, and like making binary size smaller. There are like 2 people doing the platform side, but actually we are kind of very still in a growing stage, and yeah, we don't actually much, you know, to make reducing the like binary size, but yeah, we have 14 people.
Yeah, on SoundCloud we have around 20-something iOS engineers that they all work in the application, and we have, I think, 13 or 14 Android developers. That being said, if like the amount of developers that are kind of like in charge of trying to keep the binary size small and the launch times, I guess it will be, well now thankfully, 2 on iOS and 2 also on Android. So it's not like very nicely balanced, but yeah, it is what it is.
I think I can come in from a designer point of view. For designers, I think if you are coming up with a startup, a new product, there's no definitive number. I think if you have a great designer, 1 might be enough. If you're working in a big organization, you might need more. But then the shift change from the number that you have into the culture and the quality of the designers that you have. So it's not a matter of number of designers that you have, but the quality and how they work together, that's more important.
My only experience for the last couple companies, at Twitter we had around 40 iOS engineers, and there was maybe a 9-person foundation team that would do shared UI components and CI sort of work and app size changes. At Airbnb, similar 40 iOS engineers, and they split up the teams into UI frameworks and native infrastructure, and then I'm more of a CI build time sort of person.
Okay, this may be a personal question. With so many engineers, do you have a lot of issues with like code merging or conflicts?
Yeah, this becomes an issue, especially with larger repos, that we have people merging all the time, and CI jobs, we try and run them all in less than 20 minutes, and then we'll run them all again when they merge to master. And so usually it's not an issue. Master is not read that often, but every company goes through the point where they have to build a merge queue, which will run the CI tests on your pull request, and then again after you hit merge, it'll run them after it's merged to master to make sure that it is still green before that'll actually land. And so whether you batch those pull requests and commits together or do them individually is a matter of how much you want to spend on your machines or engineering work.
My answer depends on my question to the floor. This is part of knowing your audience. How many of you are actually designers or front-end developers? Just one?
3.
All right, then I'll talk to you after.
So the question was if there are like a lot of conflicts, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, like trying to dig deeper, not as many as you might think, honestly, because we're divided into feature teams. And we also have like a bunch of smaller frameworks, right? So usually there's like, and we also do a lot of pairing. So most likely there will be 1 or 2 pairs of developers working on a specific feature on a specific framework. So usually there are not that many conflicts, although when there are conflicts, they are massive and they're horrible. But yeah, I mean, we haven't actually reached the point to have like a merge queue, which will be nice. But we do kind of like monitor all of our like more important branches, kind of like if we were NASA. So we have like a lot of monitors. At least my team has. We have like a bunch of monitors and we have like a lot of graphs. And it's like there's nice colorly coded screen which all of the branches. And we notice when master is red because usually we need to figure it out why. So yeah, there's a lot of conflicts.
Yeah, same as him. Making small teams and don't edit the same file, you know. Only 1 or at least maximum 2. And the important thing is if somebody needs to like, I mean, 2 people are working in a, you know, for 1 file, for example, they should communicate at least. And we also often like check, you know, team how the team is doing and like. You guys should communicate more together, and communication is very important, so I often ask them to do it. And one more thing is that split the code into more files so that you don't get conflict, right? Yeah, so that's also important.
I imagine that also includes having multiple storyboards. Okay.
Just to add to this, there are some handy Git commands that you can use to see which files are edited the most in your repository, and those can be the hotspots that are the most beneficial for you to break up into different pieces, because they're the ones that are most likely to have merge conflicts.
Okay, there's a question specifically for you, Stephen. I read the blog post where iOS architecture had switched to React Native, then back to native. What's the current state? Is it hybrid?
So the current state of the Airbnb app, this is something that lots of people bring up, that we have official statements that we've shared on Medium blog posts that we had jumped in really wanting to experiment with React Native, especially because Airbnb has this really strong JavaScript team, and it was difficult to hire native engineers for quite a while. And so that was a valuable choice because it meant that those teams could add features and iterate. And especially if you have long build times, being able to use hot reloading, there's a lot of nice tooling around JavaScript. But as you grow, and for us, it became not so bad to hire native engineers. We hired some really great engineers. And it became a pain point to build tooling to support not just iOS and Android, but iOS and Android plus this shared JavaScript infrastructure that became difficult, and the borders where you have to handle the interactions between JavaScript and iOS code was a difficult pain point that if we had more JavaScript experts, particularly on the native team, it might have been fine, but we had decided that the reasons we had used React Native were no longer as important. And so you may have read in some Medium blog posts that we decided to stop supporting React Native, and it should be gone from our entire app by this summer.
Okay. This question, maybe you can start with Priscilla. Are tutorial screens and guides important for an app?
I think it then goes back to human behavior and psychology. You have a split. There are people who would read your README before doing any development work, and there will be people who just go in, jump in straight, and try to test things. And for me, I would use product without reading instructions, and there are people who would read instructions. If not, they're not going to use any new products. So guides is a must where it sits in the application depends again on your users and how adventurous they are, but it needs to be there someplace.
Okay.
And I would add a caveat, it also depends on how complicated your product is. So for SP, we recently rolled out EV charging. And EV charging is complicated. And there's a lot of safety issue, like, can I charge my car when it's raining? Will I get electrocuted? So your instructions needs to be very clear right at the beginning.
Okay. Yeah, sure, Stephen. Maybe specifically for Airbnb app, right? I don't know how involved you might be with the UI work, but have you ever been in a situation where you would wonder, like, would my users be confused over what to do next? And then, like, maybe you go back to the designer and say, hey, maybe this button shouldn't be here, it should be somewhere else. Is that something that a developer would often give feedback to the design team?
I work on build tools, but I'm sure that situation crops up quite a lot. And it's important as engineers to be able to have that dialogue, I think, with designers, especially if we're engineers who are also using the product. And it may be that the designer has great reasons for why they wanted to do that, and it just wasn't clear to us, and so it can be reassuring. And also it may be that they just didn't think of that idea, and then that dialogue is really valuable. And you'll hear people talk a lot about how much more expensive changes are to make as something goes through planning stages and then design and implementation and then shipping to the users. So it is definitely something that's worthwhile to do earlier on in the cycle rather than later.
How about SoundCloud?
Yes, I mean, mostly, I would say like 99% of the employees of SoundCloud are very hardcore users of the platform. And that actually like encourages us as developers or also as consumers to raise our voice. I mean, honestly, I've been working on SoundCloud for 2 years and some months, and at the beginning, I was even like having a hard time just trying to find certain things. You know, it's like you assume that something is quite obvious, and I couldn't find things. And then you kind of like just raise that concern to the designers, and sometimes you learn that it's like, oh, well, maybe it's because like, you know, like that demographic is different and I'm too old to understand this, but the whole majority of our users can figure it out. It's like, it's fine. And some other times they realize like, oh, yeah, maybe we didn't actually foresee that this is kind of like hidden or something like that. So it's actually very encouraged, and we also kind of like started to try to get more involved with design and designers very early on. So when there's a new feature, there's usually kind of like this prototyping stage where we sit down with the designers and they kind of like explain like the whole flow, and then engineers can actually give them input. It's like, oh, well, this looks nice, but it's quite complicated. So maybe it will take us a lot longer, but we can compromise on maybe doing this. And then there's a lot of back and forth. And we get a consensus, and basically we actually, in the end, we reach, I think, what is best for everyone, even the users. So I think it's a very sweet spot because we're actually encouraged to raise when we detect something that might not be as obvious as everyone thinks.
So for designers, usability part of the interface is actually the simpler part. If you don't have the benefit of working with a designer, there's actually a simple task that you can do. So whenever you build like a new screen, try to show it to a user who probably not a developer because they are very digitally comfortable. Get a target user, and these are 5 simple questions that you can ask as part of a usability test. So the first question is, what do you think this is? So this gives you insights into whether they know what this product is about in the first place. The next question would be, how do you know this? And this gives insights back to the designers on what are the elements that they should keep on that page and the elements that is not working. And then the next question is, talk about your experience. What goes through your mind as you look at this? It is your journey when they look at the screen. What do they look first? What are they thinking? Try to get them to think aloud, not asking leading question. And the next question would be your question. What would you do next? So this would then test your call to action. So if you want to lead user to a specific thing, and if you ask this question, what what would you do next? And it is nothing like what you plan them to do, then that's the problem that you need to correct.
Yeah, on that note, that actually reminds me of something that we also do at SoundCloud. We have something that we call deep dives. And yeah, basically we kind of like invite a bunch of users that are outside of the organization, and we sit them down and like give them the app and go through kind of like the whole flow that we're trying to test, and we take notes and get feedback, and based on that we kind of like build upon it so that we can give like a better experience. So it's, yeah, listen to your users, I guess.
Yeah, inviting users is also one approach we do, and also like in our team, we communicate with the designer from the beginning and make a brainstorm. I mean, the designers first come up with like a new UI, but like if the engineer feels this is not simple enough, then we give the feedback and we brush up the design. And still, we sometimes have like 50-50 design stuff, you know. And at that time, we normally use A/B testing and to compare and decide which one to go the last, you know, which one to win. And yeah, A/B testing is pretty useful.
How often do your companies do these external user testings?
Actually, I'm not very sure about that.
Well, yeah, me neither, but specifically. But I know that we used to do it quite a lot before. I think now we kind of like start like to reduce that for like the past year, and I think we're trying to ramp it up again a little bit more. I couldn't actually give you like a direct answer, but I will say that probably within 2 months, at least once every 2 months or once a month or something like that. That's, I think, what we're trying to achieve with these deep dives.
For us, with every big product where there's a lot of questions, open questions, and there's a lot of uncertainty, we definitely would do a full-fledged user research where we do one-on-one interviews. For usability questions, we do this gorilla testing, where these 5 questions will appear and we just grab anyone from the street. It could be your friend, it could be your relative, it could be someone that is not digitally native, and you have a good, you know, sample size, and you ask the same basic question, and it's a very fast way to actually give you more confidence that your design is working or not.
We have quite regular user tests, both at Twitter and Airbnb. And at Airbnb, there's 2 things that I really appreciated. One is during new hire training, that you sit in with a customer support representative, and you can listen to live calls, and often customer support has the best idea of what's wrong with a product because they get the same questions over and over again. And you can empathize a little bit more with users. And one of our lead engineers had started doing this little session in our regular iOS meetings where someone would be brought up and blindfolded and asked to do something in the Airbnb app with voiceover. And it was wonderful to see how much struggle it was to figure out how to get somewhere or whether it was even possible to get somewhere. And so that's a different type of user testing, but was really meaningful for engineers to see how difficult it is sometimes as a certain demographic of user to get things done.
On that note, right, I think one of the questions here was about if the app is crashing or if there's a problem with the app and they can't really solve the problem fast enough, but it only seems to affect a very small handful of users. Is it really worth trying very hard to fix it? But on your point, perhaps it's also worth looking into the accessibility for even the minor crowds.
Yeah, this is such a good question, especially as you get more users, that there's always going to be crashes for some subset of your users, and to decide what to prioritize is really important. And I think it's also important to note that crashes are only the 3rd worst thing that your app can do. It can also behave inconsistently, that's worse than a crash, or it can corrupt user data, and that's worse than a crash as well. So it's also valuable to have logging to figure out if there are fewer people getting to certain pages or their behavior is changing in some way. But I think that idea of empathy and trying to make things better for all the users is super important if you can do it and prioritize that.
Are you guys doing it for your apps, like taking care of like accessibility for the different kinds of users?
We are making like efforts in that front. I would like to say that we're doing a little bit more, but right now, unfortunately, we don't think we have like the amount of resources to devote to it as much as we wanted to. But that being said, with SoundCloud we have something that's called like SAT, which basically it's 20% of your time you get to spend it in anything that you like to, like that will help you be a better engineer, or that could bring benefit to the company in a way if you want to. And there are like a couple of engineers that kind of like took that SAT as part of their mission to try to bring it and make it more accessible for users.
Okay, one question from Jeff. The best apps seem to be made by 1 or 2 person teams, like examples Twitterific, Delicious, Sparrow, etc. How do large teams add to these like app teams compared to these smaller teams? Maybe Esteban and Steven first?
Are you saying why are we so bad at making apps in large teams?
Maybe more like what value do large teams have over small teams?
Oh, what would the benefit be if you have more people? I think one of those benefits is that you can try and add value for a broader demographic of people, to have someone involved in accessibility, or to have someone who is going to reduce the number of network requests you have. One company I was at, they found that to open the app and get to the main screen as a new user, it took 24 network requests, and you had to download 5 megabytes of data. And so to do that investigation is really useful. And even things like security, being able to ensure that you're taking care of every edge case sometimes takes engineers to really look at something well. And so those are benefits, those are tasks that are harder to do in a small team, though you can totally do it if you've got engineers with a lot of experience, but it's just a little bit harder to prioritize something like that.
So I don't necessarily agree with the question. We call that a leading question. And I think there are great examples of big companies who are able to do amazing user experience. Apple is one great example.
Well, that's tough to follow. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess the benefit of having like more resources is that you can actually allocate it into different areas. So you can tackle, if you want to think of it, like, you can make speed. You can tackle more things at the same time if you want to, or you can even focus on certain things that need to be worked on while the others are kind of like adding new features, for example. And that's very hard when your team is small, because then you need to actually prioritize with even more care. I don't know, like one example was basically at SoundCloud at some point when we decided to actually start to extract things into smaller frameworks, we devoted one team to grab one big piece of code or functionality from the main app and extract it into a small framework, while the rest of the teams were keeping on developing new features. And that way, what that brings us was the ability to know how to extract things into smaller frameworks, set up rules for other developers to create new frameworks, and we never actually stopped developing new features. Whereas if it's the smaller teams, then you probably cannot sacrifice certain developers to be able to do this research, because you need to keep like maintaining your application and developing new things. So it's harder. It's doable, like Steven was saying, it's doable. It's just that it's harder and probably it's going to take a little bit more time.
Yeah, with our limited resource, and we have to split into how we should do the core part, platform part, or we do the new feature part. If the resource is unlimited, we can put it into many platform or CI part. But actually, in our company case, we are growing, but we still want to limit the number of engineers coming. We can't just hire everybody and please do it, because it's, we are hiring only for skilled persons. So we are now 14 people yet, but with that, so we just split the resource, and only we have on two core team, 2 persons. So yeah, it's very hard decision to make it like 3, 4. Otherwise we can't do the new things. So it's just a hard decision for us.
How do you balance that? Like the analytics that you guys do for, say, checking on the mobile data usage to try and optimize that, compared to while working on the new features? Like, what's the good balance between those 2 core work components?
I think that is the perpetual question for any company that is growing, saying how much should you optimize essentially and how much should you focus on new development, something like that. If you ask a venture capitalist, they'll say, hey, I'd love for you to optimize, but you need to make sure that you have product market fit first of all, or else your company isn't going to be around in another year. And so making sure that you're growing and meeting that need and building some revenue or having enough growth and you have a plan for that is still the most important, even though I would love to optimize everything. That is some direction that I tend personally. But once you have established some of that product market fit, I think it is really important to keep those most loyal users. And those most loyal users are often going to be the ones that complain, and they complain because they love that, they want this product to be good. And so to treat them like you'd want to, that recognize that that's really valid input, and it's not just complaints, that the goal is to make your product better.
I think for every organization, there are key KPIs and metrics that you need to be mindful of. So things like your monthly active user, your user engagement, sessions per user per month, these are your metrics that keeps you in check. And I think that product design and product development is a science. And opinions is really hard to justify, especially if you go up to C-level and you say, I think I should do this because I have a gut feeling that it's going to be right. You need to actually put some numbers on a paper and promise that, and then you get the resources to actually build what you have in mind. So optimization data is definitely important. Even if it's a new product, you should tie it back to where you're trying to go towards in terms of metrics and business KPIs.
Okay, there's this very highly voted question here that might be controversial. Uber's app was beyond Grab and Gojek in terms of design, animation, and user friendliness. However, it didn't survive in APAC. Any opinions?
So I think it goes back into my hierarchy of needs, where user value is definitely where you need to meet. And once you met that and you have proof that you have provided a value back to the users, then you have the luxury of doing, the cherry on the top, which is your nice onboarding experience, your nice impression, your animation, and your nice visual graphics. But if you have not met the basic value, which I think, I'm not in Grab, so I can only make guesses here. It's all about price, and it's all about your supply. So you need to get your transportation in the best price. And this is, I think, where Gojek is currently leading in Singapore, at least.
I think that as engineers, we always like to believe that we can make the best thing and then people are going to use it because it's the best thing. And sometimes beta loses to VHS, or sometimes there are other products that have been able to make some business decisions. A particular phone company we love has been able to buy up a lot of RAM capacity in the past and make sure that they have it, or invest in some semiconductor companies and make sure that they get 80% of all the chips. And so there are business decisions that are also really valuable in our industries as well. And so if you're losing $1 billion a quarter, it's hard to decide whether you should stay and try and win or focus on some other area. That's something we do as engineers as well, is decide, hey, which of these problems is the biggest and where should we focus? So it could be that we saw a company deciding to focus on one place, even if they felt like their app was really good.
Okay, so here's another question, maybe more specific to Yasuhiro first, because you mentioned your 60 FPS scrolling. What would be like a good balance of, like, say, improving animations and transitions and, I guess, scrolling throughout your whole app? Also, when in contrast with, like, say, developing new features that you're also trying to deploy.
Yeah, so animation is my like kind of dream, you know, it's making 60 FPS. But actually, you know, sometimes we can't do it because we don't have much time to do it. Yeah, and yeah, that's how to say. That's kind of up to the developer, each developer. Some people like me, I love making animations, you know, and try to make a smooth UI. So I'm like kind of focusing on how to make a good like application from the point of animation, you know. But some people are not very good at it. For example, more interested in like how to say fast development. Yeah, and yeah, so yeah, so it's up to the individual, I think, person, and just how to say if there are like many prototype programmers, then the culture will be like that, I think. And if there's more optimized specialists, then I think people think optimization is good. So it's you know, in our team it's like 50-50, and we try our best, but yeah, not always we can do the best optimization actually.
Well, I think this depends a lot, like on. It should be a decision that should be data-driven in a way. It's kind of like a case-by-case basis. For example, if the optimization is a low-hanging fruit, just might as well just do it and be done with it. Or if it's pretty bad, then you should definitely do it, because otherwise you're going to start losing users, right? And now when you're on that middle ground, that's when you need to actually check your data. Because what if, yeah, maybe you have certain animations that are not that smooth. But when you check the data, maybe it's happening on very old devices, and the amount of users is not that big. So even though they are not getting the premium experience that you will hope for, it's not as bad as to make the product unusable. So maybe then you could actually make the decision of, well, let's sacrifice this for now and focus on bringing new value so that these users can actually get more out of the app than just a jittery animation. Whereas if the demographic that is actually getting affected is quite big, or if it's affecting old phones where the demographic is like using a lot of old phones, then you actually need to think about it, because that means that that's the majority of your users, probably your most loyal users as well, the ones that are most likely to engage with your product. And if they are not happy, they're not likely to come back to it, right? So I guess it needs to depend on your current circumstance. So it's not like, well, definitely you should just, I don't know, reserve 20% of your time and improve that. It's a case-by-case basis depending on what you're developing. More so, for example, like the cases that we were talking about. If you're a product that's growing and maybe the number of users that are getting affected or the animation is just getting a little bit slow, maybe you should focus on actually delivering what you need to in order to gain more users and be able to grow, and then focus on that. That's what I think.
I think it again go back to human psychology and behavior. I think there are some people who are very sensitive to the minor details. I would call it a craftsmanship, where you're able to see this is a better design and this is a bad design. But the truth is, a lot of people probably don't really care. So you are talking to a small percentage that is surfing, dribble, looking at animation. Because I've also met users where I give them 2 different versions, and to me one is superior, but to them it's like, you know, what's the difference? So very cynical, but I think that is the truth.
Animation is really beautiful, but it also means that you're doing something efficiently. And so that can be beneficial for users' battery life, things like that. At least, I can't say what the right answer is, but at least for us on the iOS team at Airbnb, we decided that we're going to focus on 95% of app opens in terms of which operating system we are going to support. And you could also use similar or different statistics for which type of devices you're most interested in. And the goal is just to try and be as effective as we can and make as good of product as possible while still allowing us to focus.
Okay, cool. On this note of craftsmanship, right? Is there any one particular thing in any of the apps that any of you have developed that like you're particularly proud of that you could share with the audience? If you want to show it, you can also show it.
Okay. I think the recording can be stopped. Actually, let me just.
As this is being set up, there's something I had wanted to add for app size. One interesting thing that Airbnb has done on the iOS app is they built a machine learning model to improve the resolution of images, and so they can take smaller images and they will result in being just as nice looking from the perspective of a user. And so that's something that I didn't realize was a project, but I had seen it in our app and someone explained, oh yeah, this makes our images so much smaller or so much better looking for the same image size.
If not, I think because we're running slightly out of time, so maybe I'll go on to the very final question for each of you, which is name one or more apps that you currently have installed on your phone that you think is a great app. You can name your own app if you wish.
So I'll help you. So when I was in Property Guru, Airbnb is the definition of a good property app. And going back to knowing your users and knowing your market, so a lot of people would be asking, why is Property Guru not like Airbnb? Why can't we have like nice images? And I think one of the problem, and when I say it, it's going to be very apparent, is that a lot of the properties in Singapore are not as pretty. We don't have nice yards. We don't have nice furniture. A lot of the properties in Property Guru are resale. So these are empty apartments. And if you blow it up on the website, it's going to affect the design. So even though some designs are aspirational, but you need to understand how it fits in your market and with your users. So I think that's one example. But another app that I love, which is going to come as a surprise, would be Taobao, because it is completely different from what Delta Rams and Johnny Ives believes in simplicity and minimalist, and it's very messy, very complicated. But I think it expands our expectation, and it actually makes us question how complicated can an app be, and how much complication can a users take. And we find that they are actually quite, diverse, and a lot of people, especially in Asia, can take very complicated designs and application. So I think different perspective, it's good to open your mind to different school of thought as well.
I have a very unpopular opinion that I really like the Facebook app. But personally, I also really like apps that have something interesting technically inside them, especially if they help me to do my job. And so the Charles app has been really cool to see that it can run and intercept network requests right from on your phone. As you might imagine, it's not as useful as it used to be now that all apps basically pin SSL certificates, so you can't inspect inside the network requests. But for your own app, it's really useful in a debugging version, or even just getting an idea of which network requests are being sent to a URL without necessarily looking inside it, or even seeing which ad networks certain apps are using. It's kind of an eye-opening experience if you haven't used the Charles iOS app yet.
Well, to me, it's a must. It's a Mastodon client, and even though it's like basically doing a lot of what a lot of Twitter clients or something like that does, it does it in a very nice way. You feel like it is actually kind of out of the ordinary. It's like a great attention to details. The combination of colors is very nice. It's very customizable, And I feel like it's a very good app because it has like a lot of the things that you will like. It's like the animations are quite good. It's smooth. When you actually kind of like, I don't know, like you click on a media box and you kind of like just drag down, it gets like the picture-in-picture thing, so you can actually keep scrolling. I think overall it's a great app that makes me want to come back because I enjoy just using it. So yeah, that's to me is a great app.
I'm just looking at my iPhone and I cannot figure out which one should I choose, but I would say, let's see. Yeah, I would say Twitter because I just use a lot, you know, and scroll is good, yeah, and I think Twitter is like making quite a lot of UI changes. That's interesting to see. Like previously, like 1 or 2 years ago, like launching animation stuff or the number of favorites and like retweets are like printed on the very first screen, which for designer it's like kind of so many numbers and texts are like printed in one screen, and it looks like some people said awful, but eventually I feel like it was good decision for me, yeah, and so I really learned a lot from that. And like recently, like the action sheet coming from the bottom, it has like not the original iOS's action sheet, but how to say? It's like Apple Maps, you know. How do you call that? Action sheet? I forgot. Yeah, it's great. You can pull it up and make it this full screen or semi-modal screen. That kind of UI is very good because iPhone 10, like it's getting bigger and bigger, longer. You know, I hope the longer is will be stopped in this size. You know, not forever, but yeah. So yeah, and yeah, the bottom navigation is really good approach in general. Yeah, tweet button is, I think, moved to the bottom, I guess, yeah. So those kind of challenges I really loved in Twitter.
All right, thank you. I think we're quite over time. So yeah, once again, thank all of you for joining us on this panel. If you have any further questions for them, maybe you can find them at the after party or perhaps on Slack. Thank you.